But on Reuters, they reported a poll which was taken very recently that put UKIP as second place to Labour in the European elections. There have been rumblings over the past couple of, year or so, I guess, that UKIP would actually come first.
Mm-hmm.
But right.
See, I've never understood all of those rumblings because they haven't yet won a by-election. And they keep on saying how good they're doing in by-elections. Surely 15. Do you think that that's going to be possible?
I don't really see it happening at this point, but there is a bit of time to go. It's probably a bit. The trouble is that they do have a lot of votes, but the votes are spread out over the whole country. So if they had a lot of support in a particular
constituency, the flaws of modern democracy.
Yeah, I mean, then they'd definitely, they'd already have a couple of MPs, as would the BNP have had a couple of years ago. So you maybe should be somewhat thankful for the iniquities of first past the post. But no, I don't really see it as that likely that they'll get a seat, because I just don't really think the support is localised enough.
Okay, so I didn't pay attention very much to the conference that they had. What do you think that anything has changed after the conference? Tell me what happened at the conference. Tell me everything.
Well, the only bits that were really reported were obviously Nigel Farage's bits.
Well, because I for one, I can tell you a few UKIP members by their face. But Nigel Farage is pretty much carrying the party at the moment, even though they have something like 9 MEPs.
Yeah, they do. I think they're mostly based in the southeast of England. So
proud.
Yeah, we vote in the best people. But there are a couple of things he said. One of them, actually, in relation to the discussion we just had, is that Farage said if they don't get an MP at the 2015 general election, that he will resign. Although he said it in such a way that it was, as I think Andrew Sparrow reported it on The Guardian, it was kind of flippant, the way he said it. And afterwards, I think a UKIP spokesman also said that wasn't a serious statement, basically. So that there's debatable whether or not that'll happen. Although I think if they don't get any MEPs in the next general election, I think it will be pretty hard for him, particularly if the Tories don't get in and there won't be a European referendum in the next Parliament. I think it'll be hard for him to continue then. He also said this thing that was pretty widely reported about travelling on a train. And he said it took a couple of stops before he heard anyone speak English. And it's kind of this...
Oh, I haven't. That went right over my head. I'd have happily jumped down his spoke for that.
Well, a lot of people have, but it's part of this whole rhetoric of the country is no longer English or British or whatever.
Who was it? Was it Vinnie Jones who said something very similar?
Yeah, but he lives in America right now.
Yeah,
yeah. And he's not known for his brains, is Jones.
Bless his little heart. So, the thing is, I obviously am not the kind of person to empathise with UKIP leanings.
You're not their core demographic.
I'm not their core demographic, funnily enough. Although I have a lot of people close to me who are their core demographic. My family have all, I come from a family that are a lot more right-wing than I am. And my granddad actually used to canvass for it used to be called the Independent Party, just the Independent Party, and he used to canvass for them in the 80s and the 90s.
Is that the predecessor for the UK Independence Party?
I'm not sure if it's the proper predecessor, but they it's a lot of the same ideology.
Sure.
Getting out of the European market, all of that kind of stuff. And so I understand the necessity for there to be representation of these people's views in our democracy. I get that.
That's very generous of you, Jazza.
I'm a great believer in democracy. Sometimes way too much. But I believe that these people who have very, very loud voices, and particularly Nigel Farage, I saw a tweet this morning because Nigel Farage was on the Andrew Marr show, and there was a tweet saying, on the BBC, Nigel Farage is never more than 6 hours away. And he's perpetually on television, and he's being invited to. He's on Question Time. He's been on Question Time more than any other elected official. Oh, like I think he's been on Question Time more than anybody actually.
That wouldn't, certainly in the last year or so, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah,
I've seen, having seen most of the episodes from the last year, that does seem to tally up, I think.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, he is just an MEP. What other MEP? He's the leader of a party, sure, but when you look at like another minor party, like the Greens, who actually have MEPs as well as a member of Parliament in the form of Caroline Lucas,
and they have control of the council in Brighton as well.
Yeah, like in terms of having power and having influence over people's lives, the Greens are way ahead of Ukip. Yet Ukip continue to get legitimised by the courting of the media by Farage, and that pisses me off.
Well, the argument is that because they don't have any MPs in the Commons, that kind of delegitimises their claim for getting all the airtime they do, particularly on the BBC. But they do have a lot of votes, so in those terms they probably deserve some representation, but I do agree that they get a lot more airtime than they deserve. But the other problem is that people do find
Nigel Farage.
Well, people find him fascinating, don't they? He's a very, whatever you think of him, people find him very engaging and interesting. They actually want to read about him. Well, maybe not you, but a lot. You know, whenever I see an article,
to me, he just looks like a melting slug.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far into
too personal. Shall we stick to the actual policies and stuff?
Well, the scant policies that they actually have, I suppose we could stick to.
What I loved was before the conference, he said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, we'll be going into the European election without a finished manifesto." And it's like, wait, so you're expecting people to vote for you when you don't have any policies, basically? You're saying that all of the policies that you had in 2010 for the general election, so they had stuff like they wanted to take away the smoking ban, they wanted to have uniforms for taxi drivers, which actually I don't think is a terrible idea, and they get ridiculed for that, but I think that for safety reasons, we can talk about that another time. And like a lot of very left of field policies that they had in 2010, he's now saying, oh yeah, that was a bit stupid, wasn't it? Yeah, we're going to go into the next election and you're not going to know what we're going to stand for.
Well, they have one big policy, which is that they want to
leaving the EU, yeah.
Which seems to be, whatever else you want to write into a manifesto would probably be undermined by that one main policy. Do you not think? When you're campaigning for the European elections, if your main thing is we're planning on leaving.
But there was I can't remember who it was probably Farage. There was a UKIP MEP who was like, oh yeah, because we don't like the European Union, we are very rarely ever in Brussels. We spend most of our time campaigning in the UK to get people to vote for us.
Well, that makes sense from, the point of view of their policies, doesn't it?
It does, but part of me has a real issue with officials being elected and them not doing the job that we elected them to do. They should be in Brussels. They should be. It's like having an MP who never turns up to Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that there aren't any punishments or anything for that sort of behaviour. You're not required by law to turn up a certain amount of times, although obviously there's problems with law, with rules like that. I do see where you're coming from with that, but it makes sense.
When I'm leader of the world, I'll change it.
A lot of your policies are kind of contingent upon that eventuality.
No, it will happen, though.
Okay.
We will
know. So what do you think actually that there will be a referendum on our European membership at some point? I
hope there is. I actually hope there is.
Why do you hope there is?
And you know that because I just want to bury this fucking corpse.
Do you think that if we have a vote, say in 2017, and we vote to stay in, which at the moment doesn't actually look that likely in terms of the polls, but if we had that vote, do you think it would bury the issue?
It would kick the can down the road sufficiently, because I find the whole bloody thing exhausting. And I'd be interested to, like, what polls have been saying that we'd end up leaving.
I don't actually have the names of them offhand. Just the ones that I have seen do seem to indicate that. But then obviously it's
I've
3 years down the line.
That seem to have those who'd rather stay in the EU at around 60-70%.
I have it the opposite way.
Really? I think there's there's undecideds, and I think that they get lumped into either or. I think it's interesting because when you look at most independents polls, it's generally splits the country 3 ways. So it's a third, a third, a third. Third want to leave, third want to stay part, third don't know. And Scotland, obviously that's wavering all over the place, but they used to be, before we had like the big run up, they were a third, a third, a third. Taiwan has a similar split amongst their population. It's all very, very interesting.
Taiwan,
yeah.
How does that relate to?
They're a country that some people want to be independent in.
Oh, I see where you're going. Okay,
there you go.
Gotcha. See, I didn't get I got the impression it was sort of China oppressing the Taiwanese, and actually they all wanted to leave. So that was...
Oh, no.
Okay.
Because a lot of the people in Taiwan are Chinese. In fact, most of them are Chinese, or were Chinese like 60 years ago, and they all fled under the after the nationalist government fell. But this has nothing to do with the EU.
Nothing to do with the EU. We were talking before we recorded this about... because this is a huge story that's going on at the moment. I said to Jazza we can't entirely ignore it.
Yeah.
What's happening in the Ukraine? Obviously, the story is developing pretty much hour by hour at this point. So by the time we actually send out this podcast, things could have changed.
It was ridiculous. I was sitting in the pub and I was following Twitter, and there was a really interesting article. And I'm sorry, I realised I just butted in and started talking over you, but you know. That's what I do. There was an article in the Evening Standard on Friday about how unreliable social media is, and then on the Saturday night, when all of the revelations about like Russia readying troops and their parliament giving the go-ahead for military action, no other news source would have been able to keep up with that, or I can't think of any, and Twitter seemed like the best place to be getting lots of different information.
Well, The Guardian does have a pretty good live blog system for certain events, which a lot of it does draw on social media, so it sort of relies on those sort of sources to actually keep up with what's going on. But yeah, I do kind of see your point. I think the trouble with Twitter is obviously the reliability issue.
Yeah.
So you're not...
Oh, as long as you take it with a pinch of salt and you're not going to start declaring war off the back of Louise Mensch's tweets, then you're fine.
Yeah. But I mean...
Do you think that the Ukrainian issue is going to influence the elections that we have in the rest of Europe at all? Because it's really fucking scary, because this is potential war in Europe. Not even in Europe's backyard, it's in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, right now, it's not actually certain whether Russia are going to go... Well, Russia is already partly in, but it's not certain whether it's actually going to erupt into actual,
I was
combat.
thinking of a sexual metaphor there. It's like, Russia's already part...
Yeah.
So, go on.
But yeah, in response to your question, I don't really see it affecting the way we vote as such. But I do think it has implications for the future of the EU as a whole. It might be that the EU has in some ways already reached its natural limit as to how far it can extend, given the interests of Russia in the sort of Eastern European region. So in that sense, I think it does have implications. But no, I don't really see why that would factor into most people's calculations as far as the EU goes. How do you see it?
I don't know. The impression that I get is I feel like people are a lot more detached from this crisis than, say, Syria or Libya. I feel like people are less likely to have an opinion on it. In terms of like the British public, anyway. That's just been my impression. Maybe I'm wrong.
It might be because there doesn't really seem to be any chance that we would go into Ukraine, whereas there was a chance we would have gone into Syria in some
Do you
form.
reckon? Do you think that because in terms of like international law, if Russia annexes Crimea
Hmm.
and we bear in mind that Ukraine is part of NATO,
Hmm.
it's basic like in terms of like the treaties that we signed, we are obliged to go in and defend the sovereignty of Ukraine.
Yeah, there's one in particular called the Budapest Memorandum.
Uh-huh.
But
I love it when you know stuff about it. Go on, tell me.
well, basically, Ukraine, when it split off from the Soviet bloc, had a containment of, I think, 3,000 or so nuclear weapons, which were obviously Russian ones, effectively, but they were left in the region. And it hung on to them till about, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 95 when this memorandum was signed in Budapest, which said Ukraine will give up its weapons if Russia promises not to respect the territorial integrity of the Ukraine, and the UK and the USA will pledge to support Ukraine if Russia starts to get aggressive again, in effect. It's very, a lot of people have been drawing comparisons to the treaty we had concerning Belgium's territorial integrity during the First World War, or Poland's in the Second World War.
Yeah.
But it does seem to me to be very unlikely that we would engage.
Why do you think it is? What's different now? Is it just because there's
no chance of us winning? So, you know,
there's no chance. What do you mean by winning? What would you view as us winning in Crimea?
Well, the victory from the West point of view, if you're talking about Western interests, is that Crimea remains part of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then Ukraine drifts into the orbit of the European Union. That's within our interests, broadly speaking.
Okay.
But the trouble is that obviously Russia have a huge strategic advantage because it's so much closer to them.
Oh, and they also have the backing of half of the country.
Yeah.
The only... See, the thing is, I think it would be a great shame for Ukraine to split, but it seems like the only viable option right now. Like, without a... Because they're meant to be having presidential elections in May that were brought forward. And I have yet to have heard about an individual who is running for president who would be able to bring together the country rather than separate them. Because whenever there's been a president, they've always been for either the Russians or the Ukrainians in Ukraine.
The other thing is the mayor of the Crimean capital, whose name I forget.
They're all very long and very Russian sounding, and
they all have Vich at the end of them.
Yeah.
But he said today that there would be a referendum on Crimean secession at the end of March. So
secession to Russia.
It wasn't actually clear to me whether it meant leaving Ukraine and joining Russia or just leaving Ukraine. I assume it means joining Russia because I don't really see Crimea striking out on its own. But yeah, I mean, it does seem likely that there'll be changes to the map, basically.
See, I am not as optimistic as you are that we won't be dragged in. And it's really annoying because all of this has landed on a weekend. And when I was on Twitter last night, all of I follow a lot of European foreign ministers, surprise, surprise, because I have nothing better to do with my life. My life is, at the moment, just playing Pokemon and following the Swedish foreign minister. But anyway, he was saying there are serious consequences to Russia's actions. We will convene a meeting about this on Monday. And it's like, no, there needs to be a meeting about this now. This is really, really serious. You might be going on like a long weekend away to Paris or something, but no, we need to sort this now.
Sorry guys, busy till Monday. We'll get back to you.
Thank you for calling the Swedish Foreign Ministry. Unfortunately, nobody's here to take your call right now, but we're on the brink of war. Oh, isn't it fun that we can laugh about this?
It is. The thing is, I just don't see. I just can't really see the. I mean, Obama has said that there will be costs. Was the actual phrase he used?
Oh, Obama's not going to do anything. He's
Well,
the
if
most
the-
uninterventionist president that they've had ever.
If the states don't do anything, then the UK doesn't do anything. If the UK doesn't do anything, then the rest of the Germany and France don't do anything. So that seems to me to be the end of it, really.
I think that we're forgetting the power that NATO still has.
Okay, how do you see that kind of?
I see, and I wouldn't see this as a US-UK intervention. I think that this would be a pan-national thing, most probably instigated and carried out by NATO forces, rather than any individual country.
So do you see us putting troops on the ground and then?
Maybe. Maybe.
Do you see it? Do you see it escalating?
I see NATO trying to work together with Russia in order to create a stable environment until the May elections, and until that point, trying to maintain the current borders of Ukraine.
Is that in Russia's interest, though? Given that there's a very good chance that they
for there to not be a full-out war is in Russia's interest, I think.
Do you think Putin will see it that way, though?
No, probably not, because he's a crazed psychopath.
So,
as opposed to those sane psychopaths.
All those sane psychopaths just wandering around.
Yeah.
But we've probably sort of milked the Ukrainian issue. We probably should bring it back to Ukip.
Yeah.
And
we've talked for a very long time, by the way.
we have. How long are we?
25 minutes.
25 minutes. Should we round it off and bring it to a close then?
Round it off, bring it to a close. Round it off, bring it to a close. Yeah.
Do you want to say something smart and broadcasty with your 7 years of YouTube training?
Fuck you, you patronising bastard.
We used to drink bottle gyms and the whole world had a sing. Meet the trees and on such bar. We used to dance, so take a chance. I lost my mind to young romance. Yeah, I don't mind, I got it back. Half the time I'm waiting for a second chance. Half the time I'm glad I feel alright.
She is a proper idiot. She's an actual genuine idiot.
I quite like her. I
Really?
genuinely I liked her in Parliament. But she's just a chicklet knobhead.
Yeah, she's an idiot. I don't. Why would you like her in Parliament?
Because she was a nice breath of fresh air compared to like what Tories usually look like.
I don't know. I'd vote for any fat old white man in favour of her.